Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of 2 Point Sports. Today is Wednesday, March 8th, and we're still coming off of a great recruiting weekend for Oklahoma. Had three elite five-star defenders, and if you hadn't watched our previous recap video on Monday's show, be sure to go check that out. It's on our channel, so just go navigate over there and then come back to this video. So we're going to be talking a little bit more recruiting. Some progress that was made on one of the five stars. Honestly, it seemed like all the five stars had a great time, but one specifically, Williams Noweri, we're going to be talking about him. We're going to be talking about Aaron Flowers dropping a top 10. What does that mean? Oklahoma seems to be targeting another transfer cornerback or defensive back. They might be bringing in another kid. And then OU Board of Regents, man, they're funneling some money into the athletics, not just Oklahoma football, but Oklahoma everything, it seems like, outside of wrestling. Wrestling didn't get much love, but pretty much every sport is getting some sort of allocation for stadium or facility upgrades. And then we're going to be talking a little SEC football scheduling, potentially our three permanent opponents every year. What does that look like? What do we think? Does Oklahoma get the short end of the stick, or do we like it? And kind of the long-term implications of this scenario that a Sports Illustrated person put out. So we'll get into it now. So as I hinted at, 2024 five-star Williams Noweri, the number one defensive lineman in the class, number 3 player overall out of Lee's Summit, Missouri. Close friend with Caden Green, came down for like his fifth or sixth visit. So he's been on campus, not a stranger by any means. Came down, seemed like it was a great visit. No complaints. Obviously, he had some great quotes that I think On3 put out and 247 put out on their Twitter profiles, talking about how he feels like Oklahoma could be home, he could be used, and everything else, and really to his full potential. And then late Sunday evening, I think at like 11:30, OU insider Parker Thune entered in a crystal ball in favor of Oklahoma. Obviously, that's great news. It's a great thing. I'd rather be in favor of Oklahoma than anyone else. It's quite early still. I mean, it is March. He most likely will not sign, assuming he does an early signing day. It's still 9 months out. A lot of things can change. He's planning for more visits to Texas A&M, Colorado, Georgia, LSU, maybe. I mean, a ton of Power 5 schools, literally the pick of the litter. He's going to be visiting. But obviously, he's already been to Oklahoma nearly a half dozen times. Oklahoma seems to have a leg up. Obviously, Parker thinks he does. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of things going in the right direction here for him. It's kind of reminding me a little bit of like Derek LeBlanc and how often we talked about him because he was visiting OU so much. And I doubt that this is going to be the last time that Williams will be on campus. I'm sure he'll be on probably another 2 times before any official visit comes around. And that just shows that the staff and the Todd Bates effect that we talked about a lot last year, and especially in the summer when we were seeing a lot more of that defensive line group really start taking interest in Oklahoma, is starting to potentially come to fruition. Again, at this point, it is just heavy interest in a prediction. A crystal ball is just a prediction. Some people learned that the hard way because, for I guess, few fans believed crystal balls were fact, and that is 100% what was happening. It's not. They're just educated guesses. And these guys that have information. Again, we posted on our Twitter, like, it would be awesome to get clearly Williams Noweri, and we all hope that David Stone ends up committing to OU. Those are the two that, when Parker came on our show, I think it was November or early December, those are the two names he talked about when we asked about the 24 class. He said those two are the two top defensive linemen in the class and are very heavy leans towards Oklahoma. And that was, again, 3-4 months ago. So that great prediction from him there. And then you still have guys like Nigel Smith out there, as Zadavian Sims. I'm sure I'm missing someone else. Edric Houston, who was also on campus, and you guys talked about him on Monday's video. Like, there's a lot of guys, 3 5-stars in the defensive line room that are interested in Oklahoma, and where he could be a great start to what we've expected to be a huge haul for the defensive line group.
Yeah, and since you weren't able to be on the podcast, I wanted to, as we were talking about it, I wanted to ask you about it. There are 3 5 stars that are interested in Oklahoma. I would argue that Nigel Smith is a borderline 5 star and could potentially become a 5 star after his senior season. I mean, he's the number 38 player in the class, so he only has to move up like 6 more spots to be considered a 5 star kid, according to 247. So he is borderline there. So potentially 4 5 stars. What's your thought on Edric Houston? Brandon and I's thought was it's great. It's definitely showing that Todd Bates has a pull. Obviously, Georgia is a state that Todd Bates recruits extremely well. The fact that he showed up is impressive. The question is will he show up again in the spring game or for the Champion Barbecue or something before taking an official? Can Oklahoma get another unofficial before an official? I kind of feel like if they did get another unofficial, I would feel like there's a legitimate shot. It's going to be hard to get him away from Clemson, Georgia, Alabama. What do you think?
For sure. Getting one more official would definitely put Oklahoma in a better position. I think this was just a really, really good first impression. From the post that he put on Twitter, from what's been reported, it seems like the staff blew him away. He feels super comfortable in Norman. So it is just a matter of getting him more comfortable with the coaches and with the city of Norman and making sure he feels at home being there. I for some reason I just believe that with how, and you guys mentioned it, the spring game, that's going to be a huge piece in this recruiting cycle. With how the fans showed up last year, expectation is just as high, if not higher, for attendance for this year's spring game. It's got to be something that every recruit that's at least a little bit interested in Oklahoma is going to want to attend. I know that other spring games happen and travel's not always easy, especially for an official since it's on their own dime. But if they can and they have a significant, again, a little bit of interest, I can't imagine that that's not one of the games they 100% want to attend. Not only will they really see what a real game day environment is going to be like because we're going to have nearly a packed stadium, but they're going to see the intensity that the coaches coach with. They're going to get to see what a game day routine is like when it comes to as a player, like expectations pregame, in the huddle, on the sideline, that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that they're probably going to value a lot, especially when it comes to envisioning themselves and being part of the Sooners. And if Edric can make it to that game, I think Oklahoma is going to be top 3 in a position to get him. It is going to be tough to get him away from Georgia for sure. They're back-to-back champions in Clemson, still recruiting at a high level, even without Brett Venables there and Todd Bates. But I think that Todd Bates and BV can show them that this is going to be a place that defensive linemen are going to be coveted. You're going to get early playing time. And Chavis, I think, has shown that he might be him and Todd Bates are the perfect duo when it comes to recruiting that defensive line group. It's not just one guy that's doing the heavy lifting.
Oh, I would agree that they make a great team. And, obviously in year one, the haul that they got, year one of the full cycle last year was quite impressive. It's one of the better defensive line recruitment classes that we've had in a long time. So there's definitely some progress there. Also, when you talk about geographically, when you have a Nigel Smith, a Williams Nwaneri, and then I know David Stone's in Florida, but when you have those 3 guys, it seems like you have a really, really good shot at, and you probably will land at least 2 out of 3 there. You might go 3 for 3 in an ideal scenario. I just think it's kind of hard to get another 5-star on top of that. Texas A&M does it, but Texas A&M is different. There's other factors in play there. But when you have 3, and Nigel Smith could potentially be a 5-star himself, you could potentially have 3 5-stars, not even counting Edric Houston. It just becomes quite crowded. And so at the end of the day, I'm glad that he's made the trip from Georgia. My thought is if we could get the other 3 guys, I'm going to not be upset, and you can't cry over losing out on one of them, where you could have 2 5-stars and potentially a third 5-star that are in your general area or are from this area. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to look at that.
Yeah, there's definitely got to be a priority list, and I'm sure Edric is high on there. but the guys, like you mentioned, closer to Oklahoma are going to be easier to hyper focus on for the coaching staff because they can visit them more often, and vice versa. The guys can go to Norman more frequently. I just think that at this point it is very fresh, but Edric seems like he is very impressed with what happened on his first visit to Norman.
Yeah, definitely. So staying on the defensive side, let's talk about 2024 four-star Aaron Flowers. He's a safety out of Forney, Texas. He's a top 200 player, number 175 overall, and the number 11 safety in the class. He put out a top 10, and it consists of Baylor, Michigan State, Texas Tech, OU, Bama, Washington, Louisville, Oregon, Tennessee, and Southern Cal. When I look at this list, I can pretty much tell you that probably 5 schools aren't even really going to be a potential landing spot for him, because how can you really be genuinely like, I could go play there in 10 schools? I don't see him going to Michigan State. I don't see him going to Louisville, Washington, Texas Tech, Baylor. I just don't see any of those schools. When I look at it, Tennessee, USC, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Oregon are the 5 that stick out to me. They're the biggest programs. But saying that, I know he's been on campus multiple times. It seems like Brandon Hall's recruiting him extremely well. There's a crystal ball in favor of him, I think, from Parker Thune, in favor of Oklahoma here. I think Aaron Flowers is someone that's definitely could be a part of this class. But dropping a top 10, he still might not commit till after the spring game. Maybe probably summer, I'm guessing. Probably Champion Barbecue-ish time, somewhere in there. What do you think?
That's exactly what I took away from it being a top 10 rather than like a top 5 or even, smaller, like a top 3. It like we mentioned it on the show plenty of times. These top 10, 12, like they're cool to see Oklahoma on because they're clearly standing out from the rest. It's not like it's easy to stand out from every single school for every single recruit. You got to put in work. But it's also not that big of a deal when it comes to the ultimate goal of getting them to commit. I do agree. He does seem like a guy that Oklahoma is going to want in this class. It's been a while, if I remember correctly, that he's been on campus. I could not remember earlier if he was on campus for the January event. But what is ultimately going to be, again, another factor is can he be up one more time before the summer? It's tough for kids to make it on visits unless it's spring break. Who knows? Maybe he comes during the day that David Stone's on campus. So I think he'll be there next Monday. So we'll see. But Aaron Flowers is definitely a guy that Oklahoma has been pushing for a while now.
Definitely. And they're prioritizing a guy like Aaron Flowers because he can play the way that they want him to. He's got the size, he can cover a lot of ground, and he tackles well in space. So obviously definitely want him to be a part of the class, but it could be a little ways out. But when I look at the top 10, I don't buy 5 of the schools as legitimate competition just because of the size. And I mean, it is what it is. So staying in that defensive backfield, talking about we're going to talk about a potential transfer coming in is Sean Stevens. He's a Division II defensive back. He's out of I'm blanking on what school he's from. I know he's originally from Bakersfield, California. I'm just dropping the ball. West Liberty University. He had eight interceptions last year. He was first team All-American in the Division II ranks. I looked at his stats. One game he did have 4 interceptions of his 8 in one specific game, but it seems like that Oklahoma is recruiting that defensive back position and potentially is taking a transfer after the spring event or spring game and spring ball. It seems like that Oklahoma could potentially be losing someone. Not that that's really shocking, and I doubt that would be the only position that they might lose. They're probably going to lose a handful of guys just because they realize they're not emerging. Going on Sean Stevens' Twitter, he posted today when we're recording this Tuesday, he posted first team All-American, and then he replied to his tweet and specifically tagged Coach Venables on Twitter. And that's the only coach he tagged. I think that's interesting. What do you think?
It is very interesting. I don't know how he would fit in this system. I do agree that the fact that Oklahoma's there's interest there potentially from both sides, would point to a DB leaving. Who that is, I'm not going to even try to take a guess, but I would assume it's in the cornerback room since Sean is a corner. The biggest concern I would have if OU were to bring him on is he has 1 year of eligibility left. But talented at the D2 level. That seems fair to assume that he's trying to get to a big program so he can get more eyeballs on him so that he can get his draft stock up and go mid round rather than going late or undrafted. Is he able to shift his game? Does he have an extra gear? So the biggest difference between D1 or really Power 5 to Group of 5, D1 to D2 is size and speed of the players. And it's fair to say that he did very well and potentially you could say dominated at the D2 level. So he clearly has a gear to dominate maybe slower competition or not as athletic. Does he have the athleticism to take that step upwards and go to a major Power 5 program and contribute at the level that these coaches want him to? I think that's really the biggest question mark on him, but it's not like you don't see guys from not Power 5 programs elevate their play. CJ Colden was a prime example. Came from Wyoming and was probably the best corner on the team last year. And Woody Washington wasn't a slouch last year, but CJ just had better hands when it came to getting a hand on just get a deflected ball, led the team in interceptions. Sometimes they can do it, but that's got to be the biggest question mark when it comes to Sean right now.
And just talking about it as things in general, it's nice that Oklahoma is being proactive on things like this. I felt like in the previous staff, it would almost be like we're blindsided that someone would enter the transfer portal or leave or something would happen, and we would just be shocked. Like there's no backup, there's no plan of, oh, we've already got a transfer that's going to come in and take your spot. It always felt like, okay, well, what do we do? And there was no plan. It seems like there's at least some forward thinking, some logical thinking that most likely we're going to lose someone. We brought in a bunch of people from the transfer portal, young talent coming in. Someone's getting squeezed out. And someone's going to realize that I got 1 year of eligibility left, 2 years of eligibility left. I got to go elsewhere. I'm not going to see the field here. And that's just the reality of the situation. I like that while someone might not enter the transfer portal, and then you just tell Sean Stevens, hey, we don't have a spot for you. Hey, we appreciate it. Thanks for talking with us. We'd really like you if we could make the numbers work. And then it's no harm, no foul. But at least if someone enters the transfer portal, you got a scholarship, you can hand it right to Sean Stevens, and you've got someone there. And he could potentially be a contributor. I'm not sure. I do agree with you. I mean, it is tough when you go from Division II to Division I, but it's not unheard of. It's possible. So I just like that. That's just a thought I've had, that it's just being proactive and realistic with things.
Better be proactive than reactive, and really life. So
yeah, everything.
Glad that this coaching staff is doing it.
Yeah. So now, kind of getting away from recruiting, do you have any more thoughts about recruiting or anything? We can kind of move on to the next segment.
I know some people were saying that it's getting old that we were stressing about still no commitments, but at the end of the day, it's true. We still don't have commitments, but I do think that things are starting to turn around because it is starting to open up a little bit. Kids' schedules are opening up.
Definitely. So before we move on to the next segment, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, and TikTok. Everything's linked in the description below. And remember, when you're already subscribed, when you like the video and you stay around for the in video challenge and you comment, helps us a lot there. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, be sure to leave us a review on there. It helps us out a lot as well. So moving on to the next spot, Tuesday evening, Oklahoma sent out a press release that the Board of Regents has approved of athletic improvements, athletic facility improvements for a variety of sports. $175 million will be funded by athletic funds and private donations for Oklahoma. And for the football facilities, basically what it is it's outside of the Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium. It's the new state-of-the-art facilities. It'll also address some existing facilities. It's basically where, from my understanding, it's the southeast corner of the stadium, right across, what is that, Jenkins? I want to say it's Jenkins. just south of Heisman Park, where the old Switzer Center was, I believe. They're planning to build a football operation facility, indoor stadium or indoor fields, recovery, nutrition, everything that you could ever think of, basically pouring a ton of money in to recruit the best and the brightest athletes as we move into the SEC in 2024. Obviously, it will not be ready in 2024. I'm not sure where they are in the plans. I'm sure the design firms are still even drawing up the drawings, but they've at least got the construction money funded, it sounds like. What do you think? I mean, obviously, Oklahoma made a ton of promises to Brent Venables. They seem to be fulfilling that and are preparing and being proactive with their plans and recruiting for their football program. What do you think?
So when I first saw this, I had a couple thoughts come to mind. One, Thad, Turnip Seed, Brent Venables, everyone in admin is doing everything possible to make sure that OU is caught up to the SEC, big SEC programs by the time we get there. I know it's coming next year, and like you said, the facility's not going to be ready, but the plans are there. It's not like they're having to, it's not like 2 or 3 years after the transition to the SEC that we're having to play catch up there. Like things might already be in place by that timeline. The other thing is, circling back to like a year and a half ago when we were doing podcast with I can't the voice of college football. I can't remember the guy's name that invited us on, but you mentioned, and USC Fanside had picked it up, that Oklahoma and donors and the administration is buying in a lot more to Brent Venables. And at that time, we believed it. You believed it way more than Brandon and I did. But the guy that hosted us and that USC article kind of questioned that idea.
Mark Rogers.
Like, why would they invest more into Brent Venables, a first-time head coach, over a Lincoln Riley who has been winning there, has multiple Heisman winners, multiple Heisman finalists, has been to the college football playoffs? Like, it didn't make sense, but clearly there was something missing for administration and the regents to buy in financially, and Brent Venables was able to pull that out of them. Either it was just Brent Venables knew what he wanted and he commanded that before he even took the job, and just Lincoln Riley's, I guess, noviceness when it comes to putting his foot down, I guess, with that into Oklahoma administration. At the end of the day, you were right. They're investing a lot more financially into this program now that Brent Venables is the head honcho, and it's things are only looking up for Oklahoma. And that Turnip Seed is doing an amazing job in making sure the transition to the SEC facilities wise and making sure that we compare, if not exceed, what is currently at other universities.
No, it's at least now we have some sort of proof that my claim, it's not just out in left field. It just was the feeling, my gut feeling that I had. And not only talking about football, but in general, they are also approved a $75 million student athlete success center. So that's for all the student athletes. $47 million for softball facility expansion and improvements, obviously being a powerhouse like Oklahoma is. And then $45 million for the baseball program, obviously making a run in the national championship, and SEC baseball is huge. And then nearly $14 million for gymnastics and $9.5 million for basketball. We need to get out of the Lloyd Noble, but it is what it is at this point. They're funding football and can't necessarily blame them for that. And then also there have been some contract extensions, raises, and things like that for most of the staff for the football program that they got. Emmett Jones is making $550K a year. Not too bad. That sounds really nice. I wish I was making that kind of money and being like Emmett Jones. But obviously people are getting raises. Everyone trying to keep everyone on staff. Levy got $100,000 bump. So he's making $1.9 million. Pretty solid. Pretty
good deal. The thing with the LNC, because Joe Castiglione was asked about it after all this stuff was approved this morning. He mentioned that they're still considering the possibility of an off-campus venue we'll see. I'm sure that there's just a lot of planning. He mentioned that they did some community like poll to figure out, like, I'm assuming thoughts on it. I don't know where it would be. I'm not exactly sure. He didn't go into detail on like what is being researched, but the off-campus venue is not off the table for basketball and gymnastics.
It it's tough because there really isn't a ton of room for them to put a new basketball facility on campus, but I don't know. It's interesting what they're going to have to do. So, moving on, talking about the SEC potential scheduling. So, Sports Illustrated writer Dellinger, SI's Dellinger, put out an attempt at the permanent three opponents. Seems like this is going to be the format. You get 3 out of conference games, you get 3 permanent SEC opponents every year, and then you have a rotating 6 other opponent games every year. And his scenario, Oklahoma draws Texas, not a shock. Missouri, obviously there's been some history with Missouri, so that makes sense. And then Florida. Really, I like the idea of Florida. We're trying to recruit the state of Florida, and I'm sure whenever the official decision is made, all these schools are jockeying for specific strategic recruiting areas. Like, I'm sure Texas is wanting to be able to make a trip to Florida, but in this scenario, they're only getting Oklahoma, A&M, and Arkansas. So they're not getting to go to the state of Florida. There's definitely some negotiation. And if Oklahoma in any scenario can pull Florida, that's a huge win. Obviously I want to play Texas. Missouri, I'm indifferent. I'm happy to play them. But Florida is a must get for Oklahoma in this scenario. Because when you can go to Gainesville every other year and you have Florida coming to Norman every other year, that is huge to sell a recruit and their family on.
So you brought up a great point with the Florida thing. I think that's probably the biggest advantage to going to Gainesville. I'm sure it'd be fun to kind of get a rivalry going over there. But recruiting's definitely the biggest reason why Oklahoma would want to be over there. And this trio would probably be the dream scenario. Can't really think of a better mix of 3 teams to change it. I guess maybe swapping Missouri with like a Tennessee just to get a little closer to that area for recruiting, but can't win them all, and it's probably best for records because Tennessee looks like they could become a very good team, and Nick Saban sees that. He kind of started complaining about this projected trio for Alabama because they have Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee. LSU is always up and down, but they could be dangerous. Auburn and the Iron Bowl usually a good game, and then Tennessee, like I said, potentially becoming a powerhouse in college football would make it hard to want to see them every year. But I think this trio is, again, the dream scenario for Oklahoma. I would love to imagine that they have something solidified by late summer. Because last year we looked it up right before Oklahoma was like OU and Texas were officially moving to the SEC next year. Last year they released their schedule in September. I wouldn't doubt, it wouldn't be surprising if it takes a little longer for the schedule to be released for next year, maybe by a month or 2. But I can't imagine it would take as long as the Big 12 deciding, and it went all the way. Did it get announced in January? I feel like it just got announced.
I'm pretty sure it was January.
Yeah. So I just don't think the SEC would wait that long.
Oh, I don't think they would either. I'm sure that they've pretty much got a plan. Part of me almost thinks that sometimes they feed the reporters their ideas that they're floating around to gauge people and the media's reaction to it. And I'm not saying that this is what Sports Illustrated is putting out as some insider within the SEC is giving this potential breakdown. But it wouldn't necessarily surprise me to see if they're throwing something out there to gauge a national reaction and see if it's generally overall it's positive. And if it's positive, I wouldn't be surprised if this is what they roll with. I mean, I understand that Alabama is, Nick Saban's kind of complaining, but Auburn, you play them every year regardless. Tennessee's a rivalry game. LSU, I guess, is the only school that they might be able to say that, it shouldn't be on there. Like, it doesn't have to be on there. But Alabama and LSU in the last 20 years has been a great rivalry, and it generates a lot of revenue, generates a lot of viewers. Those are the three schools that Alabama has to play. I mean, Oklahoma's playing Texas. Texas is generally, they should be good. Florida's not a bad program, and Missouri is the one that's a little down, but there is some rivalry there. There's at least some sort of reason and connection to the state, to Missouri, to Oklahoma.
I feel like if it was up to old St. Nick, he'd probably have Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt every single year.
Yeah. And then that way he can rest his starters and not really have to play them that hard and play a couple hard games a year and then be ready for the playoffs. But I think it'd be good. Could you imagine having Texas, Missouri, and Florida, and then in the year where it could be Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Arkansas, Texas A&M?
I'm assuming they'll play it like the NFL does with divisions, right? So like the NFC East will play the AFC East all in 1 year kind of thing. So like
it'll have to be something where they get some sort of rotation for the other. Well, I guess, what is it? It's going to 16 teams, and you've got 3 permanent opponents, and you're one of them. So you have a rotation of the 12 other schools. So you're only missing half. So every other, you play them every 2 years, pretty much, regardless. So
yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I guess my question kind of becomes dumb because they're not pods. They're all kind of a mishmash of different groups. So doing that kind of divisional thing, but the schedule makers have a lot to do. I'm glad I'm not them, because that's a lot of thinking of logistics. Probably the SEC wants to make sure they put out a good product. So you want to make sure you have some marquee matchups, at least 2 every single weekend. And I'm sure as the season goes on, there'll be more, because, schools either disappoint or exceed expectations, and games kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, so I was just double checking my math to make sure what I was saying, that you play every team every other year that are not your opponents, which I believe is correct, because you have 3 divisional or 3 permanent. You're one of them, so you have 12 teams remaining, and then you have 6 games. So yeah, So it's every other year you get to play, and then also you got to think about the weekend, playoff implications, all that stuff. The schedulers. Yeah, I'm not envious of that decision, but I like the way that this is laid out. I think Florida's strategically placed for Oklahoma, and obviously Oklahoma's played Florida in a national championship before, against Tim Tebow back in the day, and there's a little history there. And I think Florida would be a fun opponent for us. So, do you have any other thoughts or any final thoughts that you want to roll into the end of video challenge?
No, end of video challenge. We'll just make it pretty simple. I like to keep them simple. I know Brandon likes to go back to earlier in the video sometimes, or just off topic. What do you think about this group of schools for Oklahoma if it were to be the permanent 3 opponents for OU? Texas, that's really not when you can negotiate. Missouri and Florida. Do you like it? Do you not like it? If you don't like it, who would you rather have there? Let us know.
Definitely let us know. You made it this far. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, and TikTok. Everything's linked in the description below, and we will catch you guys on Friday.